game 1.
Yeah, and we have both our players just setting up here. Magnus is still just very quickly shuffling up. Pedro's already has his active Pokemon. Looks like there might be a mulligan there with the dice just on the table. How do you see this matchup coming, Maris?
We talked about this yesterday a little bit, and I think I talked to Robin after he lost his last round in Swiss that we featured yesterday, and he wasn't quite happy about it. So I think it's a very open matchup, possible to win for both players, absolutely. And I'm looking forward to see how they maneuver around it. It's a single price stack on Pedro's side against the Palkia. So it's weird, like interesting dynamics for sure. Looking forward to see how Pedro is playing around that, how Pedro is able to bring his Charizard into action towards the end of the game, and if Palkia is able to like sweep from the beginning. Like there's a lot of potential here, offensive potential from Palkia, and there's basics on both sides, so we can start. It looks like Pedro is starting.
Yep, there's a draw card from Pedro. It'll be interesting to see how he does navigate. As you mentioned, a couple of small changes from what we might have seen yesterday. It's only the one Echoing Horn that Magnus will have to look to play around. But typical sort of package in the LostBox deck. Does also play the Drapion V, which obviously won't have as much impact in this matchup. But, you know, again, looking at the meta that came from Little Regionals, Pedro has been able to adapt his game. So we're just getting final confirmation of everything from this side.
I think players are set up and just waiting for the sign to be able to start. Oh, there we go. We have Marcus as well. Seems like 2 mulligans, or getting 2 cards out there. Oh, okay, that's the ability used. And I think I saw a Battle VIP pass there, which Pedro might want to use in his first turn for sure. Let's see what the other card is.
Yeah, so there's a few options. I mean, he's going first, so won't be able to play that supporter, of course. Does have the Chorus Experiment. Does choose to Lost Zone that Battle VIP pass. The other card we didn't quite get a chance to see exactly what it was. Pedro also knowing, you know, if Magnus going second, the likelihood of being attacked on his first turn is very unlikely. Does prioritize that Manaphy, maybe, also because of that Greninja that's already in the active spot. Also has that path to the peak to shut down the Radiant Greninja from actually doing anything.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if Manaphy was maybe the second card and he chooses Manaphy over that Battle VIP pass, because in general, you want to start increasing your Lost Zone counter as soon as possible. On the other hand, of course, Palkia VStar is doing more damage the more benched Pokemon each player has, but considering most single-price attackers or single-price Pokemon on Pedro's side are so low on HP, filling up your bench won't be as big of a disadvantage.
Yeah, no, definitely. And we've just passed back over to Magnus after Pedro just passed. Straight into the deck with the Capacious Bucket, giving himself a chance to understand what's in the prizes at the moment. I mean, just having a look at both players, nothing too crazy. Pedro does have a Fire Energy there in the prizes, knowing it's generally quite a low count because it's just for the Charizard. But doesn't mean it's it's not too bad at all. Just a 1, you still have access to another in the deck. And then Pat Magnus's side, 1 Sobble, his own Echoing Horn. Could be quite useful because sometimes a lot of players from Lost Zone, playing Lost Zone box, will want to get their Pokemon in the discard. Maybe you get their Charizard in the discard, so you can easily access it later through things like Clara. And then if an Echoing Horn can be used to bring it up and sort of get rid of it, and we'll get rid of some more other Pokemon. We've seen it with some Lost City decks and Lost City Stadium
Very
decks.
interesting start from Magnus Pedersen, just attaching there, making use of the ability, but not getting too many cards out. Interesting on Pedro's side is the 1 Fire Energy is priced. The second one is in the deck. However, if without a deck storage, which he hasn't had yet, if he's maybe Lost Zoning a Fire Energy early on in the game, and the second one is priced, that could be a little bit tricky coming back with that Charizard, especially considering that Charizard is not like an early attacker. So typically, early on in the game, you would prioritize your Psychic energies, and you might neglect the Fire energies. So if he has the choice of maybe Lost Zoning 2 cards, and one of them is a Fire energy, then he might like walk into that trap and eventually end up without Fire energies until he's drawn one from the prize cards.
Yeah, definitely. Pedro's already working with a massive hand. Again, one of those very fortunate things is that the energies are at the bottom of his prizes. Typically, a lot of players tend to take from the bottom. And Pedro using things like Cramorant and other little sort of single prizes like the Sableye and Lost Mining, trying to take a lot more prizes quite quickly just to kind of get himself still in range. being able to use Charizard to sweep later. We'll hope to try and get that a little bit earlier as soon as
And
possible.
that's exactly the case that I talked about earlier. The Fire Energy now as one of the options to Lost Zone, but with the Battle VIP pass that you can't use anywhere, that was an easy choice of Pedro securing his Fire Energy for later on in the game.
There you go. So now it's just being held in hand. Of course, there may be times where Magnus will look to try and disrupt Pedro's hand as well with that Roxanne and Marnie, because Pedro, through all these flower selectings, through all this chorus experiment, will just build up a massive hand for different combos, similar to what we see with a lot of shady dealing decks that Magnus will be hoping to try and get down as well. Had a bit of an unfortunate turn one himself, and Pedro's already just bursting through some of his deck now, getting rid of those less useful cards in this matchup.
Yeah, I like his decision making here, his sequencing. He's very calm, very collected. Playing at his own pace here, basically. And we see how Path of the Peak basically shut down that Radiant Greninja and not being able to draw further into the deck. The Capacious Bucket got 2 water energies out to increase the little odds of maybe drawing into support on next turn there. But Magnus Pedersen definitely not in a favorable position right now. But yeah, Pedro also, like, the maximum attack he can pull off at this point would be a Cramorant with 110 damage. And that's not quite enough to take out the Radiant Greninja here.
Yeah, so with Radiant Greninja having 130 HP, also has that big charm. Magnus is, you can see by his body language, he's just looked like he might have drawn an extra water energy at this point. He does eventually have one more turn, maybe, where he can use Moonlight Shuriken, but because of Manaphy on the bench, you're only going to be able to target the active as an option.
Yeah, and that's not the start you want to see. 2 attachments, nothing else to do for Magnus right now. A very unfortunate hand. But of course, Path and Peak coming in clutch there, shutting down the ability to draw more cards by discarding energies. And we see a Colorless Experiment, further increasing the hand count of Pedro. Let's see what options he has and what he is discarding. His Lost Zone counter already at 6. With these 2 additional cards, we're looking at 8, and if he is able to use both his Flower Select abilities, he will be at 10 and then potentially start dealing damage with that Sableye, dealing 12 damage counters. Also not quite enough. But yeah, Magnus, like, he has to hope for that top deck next turn.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the key things that a lot of our viewers at home will have to try and start to understand as well, from Pedro's side, he may see his opponent unfortunately drawing not too well, but he still has to go through all of the correct motions, making sure his plays are still as clean and correct as possible. So he's still got to keep his odds of winning to the highest level possible here. So, this is very, very well played by Pedro. He's still sequencing correctly. He's still making sure that he's setting up his own board, setting up his own hand, ready to sort of react to anything that Magnus may suddenly be able to do if he's able to get and draw out of this. One of the things in Magnus's mind, he's got to start considering, maybe as time is ticking down now, he's really in a precarious position where he has to potentially consider looking to the future games as well.
Yeah, absolutely. At this point of the game, like, Magnus, his ways to get back into the game, definitely drawing a supporter. Also trying to get rid of that Path of the Peak, but unfortunately he's only playing 1 single stadium himself. So it's not that likely to draw into that either. And then not having any Soul's benched also reduces your flexibility going to the next turn, because you can't Drizzile Evolution, and, like, you don't have the option to access more cards from your deck, really.
Yeah.
At this point, Pedro is now at Lost Zone counter 10. So Sableye's attack is now activated. With 1 Psychic Energy, you can deal 12 damage counters. And it really comes... I feel if Pedro manages to attack this turn, then Pedro has 1 more chance to come back into this game. However, we have seen the beauty of Pokemon TCG. 1 card can completely change the game. Like, he can draw into a supporter, then draw into multiple Sobbles, maybe a Palkia, maybe finds, like, quick balls, or any other ways to discard energies, and then eventually use Palkia's ability as well. But that's still a long way to go, and Pedro just continues playing around and setting up his board. I don't see any Sableye in his hand right now.
That's the current issue, and I think that's why Pedro had a little shake of his head. He has prized 1 Cramorant, so he's was hoping to try and maybe save some of the pieces, because sometimes you want to be holding the quick ball to be able to access your Charizard. He's only it's a very short count. There's only 2 in the deck. and it's typically one very easy way, although he has Charizard in hand. We'll look to try and just be able to draw into those pieces and save some of those resources. If he does get Marnied, if he does get Roxanne, this kind of gives him an option to maybe just use those later to pick up the items or pick up the Pokemon. But he's using a quick ball now, likely to target one of his attackers. The Sableye does 10 extra damage, of course. And obviously, as mentioned, one of the Cramorant is prized, which is maybe why he hasn't quite drawn into it yet. But it'd be interesting
but
to see.
with the quick ball, he has now access to one basic Pokemon, and it seems like he's searching out the Cramorant, and with one switching card, out of all the cards he has in his hand, probably one. I think I saw the switching card in his hand, so that would be one way to get your Cramorant into the active position, start attacking, and then you're one attack away from winning this game, unless Magnus finds another basic Pokemon to bench next turn.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Pedro was sort of targeting and aiming to use the Cramorant because it does have 110 HP. Magnus's position where he's had to slowly build up the energy on that Greninja only does 90 damage to 2 Pokemon. So if he's able to use the Cramorant, it potentially could just actually tank a hit, not be knocked out by a Moonlight Shuriken, and then be able to then just retaliate with a second Spit Innocent and actually just bench Magnus.
Yeah, very good point. Actually, advantage to use that Cramorant over the Sableye, which would not have enough HP, only at 80, so it would not survive a Shuriken there. That's absolutely correct. We saw how many energies he had in hand, so there should be a third energy coming into play here. But I don't think I saw any.
No, I think he top decked in the Evo Incense, so he was just checking right now what his potential play could be. Oh, it does have the Galarian Zigzagoon with that Headbutt Tantrum ability to put 10 extra damage somewhere, which keeps him in the game, but not necessarily in a position to make a comeback right now.
Yeah. So it doesn't seem like he's not planning to attack with the Greninja, and instead is retreating it, paying the retreat cost there, and yeah, he's sacrificing his Zigzagoon here and in hope for a top deck in next turn. So he bought himself one more turn really. But yeah, there's another color experiment potentially to be played, increase their hand count. In terms of hand disruption, we see Roxanne in Magnus' list, but that is not available at this point in the game. And then we see one Marnie. So I guess the Marnie would probably be the best case here, not only lowering the hand count of Pedro, which is very high at the moment, but also getting you a fresh hand of 5, potentially getting you the tools you need to come back into this game.
Yeah, I think there might be a bit of a sticky situation here. Magnus although he has the Galarian Zigzagoon, it has 70 HP. That Greninja's taken 110 damage. With the Big Charm, it's currently got 50 HP left. So 70 plus 50 is actually 120, which plays completely into Sableye right now. I think Pedro has been able to sort of very quickly identify that, and he just needs a way of retreating. Does have a Lost Vacuum to just get rid of the Big Charm as well. Has the Air Balloon. Looks like Pedro should just be able to Lost Mine and take game 1.
Yep, perfect retreat, attack, take 2 knockouts at once, leaving Magnus without any Pokemon left on the board and secure the win in game 1 for Pedro Torres.
Yeah, it's not the most fortunate games for Magnus there.
The Rating Ninja or has access to it, he will be able to use it for at least the very first turn this time. Gives him a little bit more drawing power overall. So yeah, players are ready to set up the game. We're looking at the prizes, which we haven't talked about too much in the last game. We see a Comfy, a Sableye, 2 scoop-up nets, which can be quite important to just keep having the switching abilities around, using Flower Select more often than once or twice in the turn. But yeah, that's a great stuff for Magnus. Having the Palkia in the active and the Battle VIP pass to get you 2 Sobbles and ready for the game, maybe even a Raiding Greninja if he has any energies or the Capacious Bucket in hand. That is definitely a better start for Magnus, and he seems very happy about that. And yeah, shuffling back his deck, let's see what else he has to offer in this first turn.
Yeah, for this game 2 of our first feature match for day 2 in Warsaw Regionals, Magnus now choosing to go first. So like I said, as we both mentioned actually, just having that opportunity to just have additional chances to set up his board. Has a Water Energy in hand. I think he just flicked out that Concealed Cards ability, that opportunity to draw another 2. Does have access to an Iridot, does have another energy, does get the energy attachment as well. other than maybe an extra Sobble, I think he's in a pretty good spot compared to
Yeah,
last
I
time.
think I also saw the Palkia VStar in his hand. Might be level ball to potentially go into Drizzle next turn. So a lot of potential to combine in next turn. But Color's experiment as a start, always great. Five cards to look at. And let's see, there's one Scoop Up Net. Considering 2 of them are priced, that's a good card to have. I think I was looking at a Zigzagoon as well. Not too important in that matchup.
And the Sableye, I believe, was there as well. So there's a few very important cards. That Path to the Peak also, just the 2 copies in Pedro's list. Very useful, and again, trying to slow down Magnus's side of the board because it's just a 1 training court that could be used to sort of bump that away. But the Path to the Peak will allow him to stop not just the Radiant Greninja, but also Palkia V-Star's ability, the Star Portal that we've seen so much, to be able to burst energy on, to kind of give Magnus that opportunity to use Moonlight Shuriken when possible as well. So it looks like that's gone to the hand. Does have multiple Sableyes, so has chosen to Lost Zone the Sableye as one of the slightly more easier options. Does have 1 prized, maybe hasn't had the chance to really look at it yet, but does have access to the Quick Ball now and will shortly be going through the deck.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like his hand was quite good, where he was debating which card to discard with that Quick Ball, and he ended up using the Escape Rope. I think another Escape Rope might have gone into the Lost Zone. So, like these important tools to switch around to use your ability more often than once, actually are like limited at the moment. He's going for his first deck search. Might see that hey, maybe 2 Scoop Up Nets are prized, 1 Sableye, 1 Comfy. We also didn't see any Battle VIP pass in his hand, so there might only be 1 Comfy coming into play here. On the other side, you always have to respect the threat of Radiant Greninja's attack with that Moonlight Shuriken. So getting Manaphy out as soon as possible is also great. Seeing that it's in your deck, that's good to know. But yeah, you need to get your Lost Zone counter up. So getting that Comfy into play is definitely important here.
Yeah, and then for Pedro's side of the board as well, he's also going to find out shortly that his Magma Basin is also prized. His 1 stadium that allows him to bump the Path to the Peak alongside Lost Vacuums, because he does need to allow his Radiant Charizard to not be locked out by his own Path to the Peak. So just one of the few things that Pedro will be looking to make sure he knows where they currently sit within his deck or within the prizes. Does go for the Comfy, of course. That start of the Cramorant, which is a bit awkward because he doesn't really want to sort of waste one of his switching cards to kind of get it out of the active, but for Pedro to continue sort of bursting through, this is what he needs to do.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see that Pedro is playing out the turn in his head already, thinking about the sequencing, getting the right order done. He was shaking his head, so we haven't seen the cards yet, but I think it's a tough choice to make between the 2 he got out of Flower Select. Let's see what hits. There's another switching card gone. That won't be very nice for Pedro. And the other card was a Color's Experiment that gives him access to more cards and increases Lost Zone count even further.
Yeah, so he's already got 3 in the Lost Zone. So yeah, must have been 2 from the Chorus Experiment at the start, and now has had a chance to use 1 Flower Selecting so far. So looking to get potentially another Comfy down. That gives him an opportunity to get 4 into the Lost Zone, activating the Cramorant's ability, Lost Provisions. So if you have 4 more cards in the Lost Zone, ignore all energy costs in the Pokemon's attack, allowing Spit instantly to just deal 110 damage without any
Energy
drawback.
cost. Yeah, but Pedro, like this is one of the major challenges of this deck. You have so many decisions to make, so many choices, looking through his deck, and I'm sure Pedro is making sure that his sequencing is right, using the cards in the right order to maximize your odds of drawing into the cards you need. And but yeah, at some point you have to make decisions and discarding, switching cards, and I'm interested to see if that will play a big role and haunt him back later on in the game, where maybe he will be stuck with a Comfy in the active position and won't have an option to withdraw that and retreat it to go into an attacker. But for now, we see another Flower Select, another 2 cards, another decision to make here for Pedro. And let's see. He doesn't seem to be too happy.
Little shake of the head again.
Yes.
Sometimes this is what happens when you have to do a 50-50 Flower Selecting. Sometimes they can be really awkward. He has to Lost Zone the Clara. I wonder what the other card was. It'd be interesting to figure that out as well. Does re-bench the Comfy that he just Scoop Up Net to his hand. So right now, just needs that 1 opportunity to move into the Cramorant. Does have an escape rope, which he does play. Looks like the Greninja is the best target here, just to take a hit and not get KO'd by any sort of Cramorant at any stage. But Pedro's still continuing to burst through the deck first. Again, prioritizing the sequencing to make sure that he gets as many lost zones. Another little awkward spot. Pedro's not showing much of a poker face right now.
Yeah, not really. And there's an energy. Psychic Energy is playing 4 off. 1 is in the prize cards. 1 is going to the Lost Zone. Yeah, keeping track of the Lost Zone counter. Currently at 5, maybe 6 cards. But yeah, Pedro doesn't have an attack out yet. And he doesn't have Path of the Peak yet either. But I think we saw that being drawn earlier. So maybe that comes into play here. Both preventing Palkia VStar's ability to get more energies into the game. There's also no Manaphy. Oh, Manaphy just hit the bench,
there you
actually.
go, yep. It's just Pedro has obviously prioritized that Manaphy as well, knowing that Magnus could find a way somehow, if Path was to be bumped, to use Moonlight Shuriken to just take 2 very easy KOs on those comfies if Manaphy wasn't in play. But that's the reason why a lot of these decks do play a 2 of in Lost Zone box now. But as we pass over to Magnus, he does immediately evolve his Palkia V-Star, knowing that's such an important card to be using going forward as his main attacker of the deck, and instantly plays down the Irida to start the combo.
It makes me wonder, considering Path of the Peak shuts down Radiant Greninja and Palkia V-Star's ability, and only 1 stadium in Magnus's deck, like wouldn't you want to have more options to play around the Path of the Peak, being able to bump it with another stadium, or like maybe with Lost Vacuum? Like, how do you see this decision making in the deck building?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, with the Palkia's Star Portal ability, you only really get to use it 1 time. So you only really need 1 opportunity to bump the Path to the Peak. So because you have so many combo pieces with Shady Dealings, the Drizzles, and Inteleons, just that 1 time of just actually picking up a Stadium card to get rid of the Path to the Peak, be able to use Star Portal, is enough. Because beyond that, hopefully, you might not get Path to the Peak at the start of the game, which then means you can use Radiant Greninja initially, and then there becomes a point where Radiant Greninja really isn't that useful anymore, or a little bit less useful, I should say. So just that 1 turn typically is enough for Palkia and Inteleon to get through a Path to the Peak.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Thanks for that.
No problem at all.
And I'm looking forward to see if he finds the opportunity here. But you're absolutely right. Once the game is set up, once he has 1 or maybe 2 Palkia ready to attack, maybe then the drawing power of Radiant Greninja and already having used the ability of Palkia V-Star won't come into effect as much anymore. We saw the Drizzle hitting the bench or evolving, but we haven't seen the access to the training court yet. So abilities, especially of rule box Pokemon, are still blocked at the moment. And the Drizzle just evolved, right?
Yes, it just evolved. Has decided to pick a few different options. Does also from the Irida has a number of options there because he's already picked his own Pokemon, which I believe might have been the Drizzle and the trainer card. Does re-bench the Radiant Greninja because he's thinking there will be a point where he will be using that concealed cards. Does go straight for the Subspace Swell, doing plenty of damage. You know, there's not really many Pokemon on Pedro's side of the board which can actually take a hit. Potentially the Drapion V, but you don't really want to be putting that down to give up 2 prizes. So Magnus activating the prize race already, going down to 5 prizes now.
Yeah, and I think that's the point we talked about earlier. Palkia V-Star needs 2 energies to attack. With the number of benched Pokemon, and considering most of Pedro's Pokemon are very low on HP, he's able to pick out knockouts very early on, and that's all he really needs. And his Palkia at the moment is also not in danger of getting knocked out in reverse. There's a maximum of 110 from the Cramorant, maybe 120 from the Sableye, and Charizard is far from attacking at the moment. So the Palkia V-Star is actually quite safe, and he's happy to attack from every turn going on. And I think Pedro needs to find a way to increase his Lost Zone counter to 10 as soon as possible, start dealing out more damage with the Sableye, spreading some damage as well on the bench, and then eventually setting up the KOs for Charizard in the late game. Yeah,
definitely. I think that's what you, just as we mentioned, that's pretty key. Pedro's going to be having to find future turns where he's maybe sprinkling some damage, as mentioned yesterday, from the Lost Mine attack from Sableye to start setting up the board from Magnus's side. You know, typically a lot of the big V Pokemon that Magnus will be playing, there's no way of healing it. So just looking to, again, increase those lost zone counts, get to that 10 as soon as possible to start using his, I guess, his most common attacker in his list, which is a Sableye, that count of 3 of, despite 1 being in the lost zone, 1 in the prizes. He will have to navigate some awkward turns at the moment, I believe. So it looks like he's up to 8, it looks like he's up to 8 right now. So just 2 more to go. He might want to start maybe just applying some pressure from himself using Cramorant where possible.
Yeah, and I think we saw the Clara hitting the Lost Zone early in the game, which is a trainer card that gets you Pokemon and energies from your discard pile back into your hand, which is a great way to cycle through your Charizard. Like, you attack with it once, then get access to it again in the next turn. But with 1 already in the Lost Zone, he only has 1 option. So it seems like he only has the chance to attack once with the Charizard because it already hit the discard pile earlier on in the game, or was that game 1?
I think that was game 1.
That was
but
game 1.
It's just hiding in the oh no, it's in his hand. It's
actually just in his hand.
There you go. So he's holding it for a little bit later. We do see the choice belt in the actual discard as well. Maybe some awkward discards from the quick ball. You know, that choice belt allowing the Charizard to hit that 280 damage. Of course, Magnus does play the double big charm, so it does put itself out of range. But you know, there's ways around that. You can deal with the 280 damage and then use Lost Vacuum. To take the knockout, well. Or you can use Sableye again just to continue sprinkling some more damage on. So lots of different options. Looks like he's just had to pass over.
Yeah, it's quite interesting how the dynamic works. Like, if Big Charm is attached, you get 30 more HP. So if Pedro finds a way to deal 280 damage and then finds the Lost Vacuum, by playing an item card and removing the Big Charm, you knock out a Pokemon. And it's great to not having to use your attack to take a knockout instead of an item, because you then still have your attack. Something new has to be promoted, and that gives extra flexibility for Pedro. But yeah, he was not quite happy with his last turn, having to pass over his Lost on counter at 9 though, so 1 more flower select will get in there. I think I saw the fog crystal in his hand, so he has access to Sableye in the next turn.
Yeah, and I think that's just having to unfortunately sacrifice another Comfy or another prize through this turn right now. From Magnus's side of the board, he's played that Evo Incense to grab that big shady dealings Inteleon. Being able to grab 2 trainer cards from his deck. Looks like he's eyeing up that Irida at the moment and still picking up his second option from that Inteleon there. I'd be surprised if he doesn't go for something like the Scoop Up Net, because then he could scoop it back up and utilize that other Sobble on the bench as well to evolve that up to a Drizzle. So a number of options that are available to him. Just eyeing up a few sort of important cards. Does choose the Cross Switcher, which is really interesting. Maybe looking to target one of Pedro's Pokemon on the bench. Maybe that Manaphy is looking like a nice target for him as well. But it'll be interesting to see now from where he goes from. The Irida does look to choose Palkia V. Start building up another attacker if anything should happen to his active Pokemon. Remember,
yeah, this could be the turn that you talked about earlier, where he gets access to Training Core, removes Path of the Peak, uses Palkia V's ability, maybe Greninja's ability as well, and then it's pretty set up for the rest of the game. So that could be a great turn here. We talked about the Scoop Up Net, cycling through that Inteleon line. He has a Sobble on the bench that can evolve into Drizzle as well. However, on the same side, you have to ask yourself, I have that Sobble ready, and I can evolve whenever I need, and do I really need another item right now? Like, I'm pretty set up with 1 attacker. If I use my abilities, I have another attacker, and maybe I can save up that evolution for later in the game.
Yeah, definitely. He did looks like he did choose that Drizzle from that Irida as well. He's just going through all the motions, sequencing very well right now, making sure that his deck is slowly being thinned down to all the very good cards at the same time. But of course, he typically can pick up a number of things. I think just a quick question from the judge there. But, you know, typically what we expect, I'm sure Pedro's been following along as well, making sure that everything looks absolutely fine. But we'll just confirm that. There's no worries at all. One of the very interesting things that we saw, one of the very interesting things that I saw was that Roxanne, which has gone into the Lost Zone now. And I think there was an opportunity where Pedro had to choose potentially that Marnie, his only other sort of disruption card from one of the Chorus's experiment. You know, currently looks like he might be going down to a 2-prize deficit right now, which is not ideal because he wants to be applying pressure himself. But with those sort of disruption cards, potentially might kind of find a way to bring him back.
Yeah, not only disruption, but then in the single prize versus 2 prize cards or like 2 prize decks. Being behind 2 prize is not the end of the world, because at the end of the time, Magnus still has to go through 4 more Pokemon, 4 more knockouts. Whereas Pedro, once his Charizard is activated, can take out the big knockouts, take 2 prizes at once, and then coming back into this game. So there seems to be some discussions going on the field. We're back into the game, which makes me wonder if that is resolved. But we saw the sequencing. We saw Capacious Bucket getting 2 more water energies out, filling out the deck. There's no Drizzile going onto that Salvo, so maybe he's saving that for later on in the game. I think, I'm not quite sure if he picked out the training cord, but it could be a great way to play it right now. But there's a Drizzile, maybe getting the training cord, maybe getting another item card out.
Yeah, it looks like he did target a couple of different cards earlier, where he did choose a cross switcher a moment ago as well. Looks like he's eyeing up that scoop up net, but is choosing that Irida to kind of get it maybe ready for the next turn, maybe prompting himself to have a really sort of bursting turn going on his sort of third turn here. Just attaches a water energy to the Radiant Greninja as well. Targets down the Air Balloon Comfey. Has seen a number of switching cards from Pedro's side of the board, where it has made it a little bit awkward to kind of pivot between the different Comfeys at the moment. So maybe a really nice way of actually doing things for now.
Yeah, that's exactly what we talked at the beginning of the game, seeing 2 scoop up nets being priced, and all the switching cards that either ended in the discard pile or in the lost zone make it really hard. With that balloon gone as well now, that Comfey is stuck in the active, and if he doesn't have a switching option, he has to sacrifice 1 more energy attachment, which means he can't attach it to Sableye to then attack. So maybe Cramorant would be another attacker, but yeah, so this limits the option, and it's great to see that. I mean, it was 2 Comfeys, one with a balloon and one not, and Magnus saw the potential that this Comfey might be stuck in the active position. So he actually valued the double cross switcher, getting that balloon Comfey up, knocking it out, and like making sure that Pedro needs 1 more piece to actually be able to attack next turn.
Yeah, like I said, both decks are very combo like decks at the moment. Very interesting from Magnus as well to try and keep his Sobble out of range from an easy 60 drop from Lost Mine. Has evolved it up to the Drizzile. Hasn't yet scoop up net the big Inteleon that would be able to tank a hit, but it looks like he's also sort of prioritizing next turn, where you can get another 2-3 combo pieces as well there. Pedro's going to be looking at this board, potentially still maybe targeting down that Drizzile, knowing it's a bit of a threat, because Magnus does have to does have an option to scoop up net. Does play that Marnie that I mentioned a moment ago as well to try and disrupt Magnus's hand a little bit. We saw him obviously take that Irida from that Drizzile Shady Dealing. So a few different options there. It'll be interesting to see how Pedro can navigate the rest of his turn.
Yeah, I think it looked like Magnus was drawing into one of his scoop-up nets, which obviously allows him to take that Inteleon back in his hand and then evolve the Drizzile back into Inteleon. On the other side, Pedro has the last scoop-up net of his deck, and draws into Path of Peak and Battle VIP Pass. I think that's an easy discard for the VIP Pass, and with access to another Path of the Peak. On the other hand, I don't think we've seen Training Cord in play yet, so Pedro's Path of the Peak is still active, so he can't play that down right now, but should Training Cord hit the field, he can right away reverse that and go back to Path of the Peak. But at that point, all the abilities that Magnus wanted to use would have been used. Cramorant as a second attacker hitting the field as well now, and we see Pedro once again, in his mind, in his head, he's playing out the turn, thinking about the sequencing, thinking about the right order, maybe thinking a few turns ahead. How can I spread the damage? Where do I place my damage? How do I map out my prizes? How do I take out these big knockouts? And typically one way to work around that is by using Lost Mine and put like 30 damage on the Palkias.
Yeah.
So that Charizard doesn't need the choice belt.
Yep, exactly that. And I think Pedro's just played an escape rope, and that's why we see Magnus promote the Radiant Greninja to the active spot yet again. Does now mean Pedro has access to Lost Mine to see how he how he's going to sprinkle that damage. Already was playing it out in his head, of course. Does target the Drizzile, as I mentioned, knowing that, you know, it means now Magnus can't just play a scoop up net and then have access to another couple of shady dealings. Expected to put the 30 damage on the Palkia VStar as well, because that just means that now, yes, it is in range of a Charizard's 250 attack. Pedro just now needs to find a way of actually, well, given the opportunity, find a way to remove his Path to Peak so that his Radiant Charizard's Excited Heart ability could come into play, where this Pokemon's attack costs 1 colorless less for each prize card your opponent has taken. So similar to things like Roxanne, it's activated by your opponent taking prizes.
Yeah, it makes me wonder, looking at this game, like Magnus early setup was ready to play this game, and from now on he mainly he plays 1 or 2 cards and then announces his attacks pretty easy on. On the other side, Pedro has to go through all these decisions throughout the whole tournament. He finished with 19 points, 20 points actually yesterday, but yeah, like 5 more rounds to play with so many decisions to make. Do you think like playing a deck like Palkia, that in some instances doesn't have as many decisions to make, maybe helps you to keep your stamina up for the whole tournament?
I think it's key from particularly top players, and as we'll see throughout the rest of today, is picking a deck that you've had a lot of experience in. Typically, we would recommend players to get used to the deck more, because you're going to make less mistakes. You can start making it into sort of muscle memory, and from that going forward, you'll minimize the chances of actually sort of making more gameplay errors or any sort of mistakes going forward. From this side of things, you know, because a deck like Palkia Inteleon has so many options because of shady dealings, it gives you really a chance to kind of play games and play the roots of winning a game very differently. Of course, we mentioned it yesterday as well, this flower selecting and the Lost Zone engine that we have is very very taxing on your brain. We've seen Pedro, you know, shake his head a couple of times when he's had to make some really difficult decisions because he's got all about resource management. So it's impressive by both players to play such important decks, such great decks in the format right now, really showcasing the capabilities.
Yeah, and it seems like he doesn't have access to Sableye in this turn. However, Spitting Innocently will deal another 110 damage, getting that on the board. And if you maybe like attack one more time and this Palkia VStar can't evolve the next turn, then it will be knocked out by 2 attacks as well. So that's also another way to draw into 2 prizes. However, there's the evolution incense and there's the evolution into that Palkia VStar, securing at 280 HP and make sure that you survive 2 more attacks. But Path to Peak in play, can't use the ability, and has a Palkia VStar in the active. So if he doesn't have any switching cards in hand and can't use the ability thanks to Path to Peak, then he can't attack this turn at least.
Yeah, so now I'm just sort of thinking about both players as prize mapping. Obviously, Magnus is going to have quite an easier time just to kind of stream through just 3 single prizes. I guess Magnus is a little bit of an awkward spot right now. Doesn't have access to any sort of shady dealings, which means might be actually stuck in the active spot. Pedro, and he's just passed over, so this is fantastic from Pedro's side. Now Pedro can continue applying pressure because that active Palkia V is just taken already 110 damage. The Spit Innocently can actually just take 2 prizes now just by announcing an attack again. And once he's taken these 2 prizes, it goes down to 3, and it's just 2 more attacks almost then if Pedro is able to navigate around some further knockouts that Magnus may be applying.
Yeah, and we talked about the evolution incense and evolving the active Palkia to survive this next turn, but on the other hand, Magnus had another Palkia in hand, Palkia V, played that down and has the option to evolve that next turn without the fear of getting knocked out by the 3rd attack, basically. So he's sacrificing the active one with the 2nd attack here, but Pedro actually wasn't quite happy with the cards in his hand, so instead of announcing an attack and going right into drawing 2 more prizes, he actually wanted to make sure he can use Flower Select one more time, increasing the odds drawing into the cards that he needs. His deck is very thinned out at this point, and considering that like most of these cards are like quite important in this matchup, Flower Select gets like more and more dangerous by discarding maybe one of the 2 pieces that you need. Like, I think we saw 1 Fire Energy and 1 Charizard in his deck. If he draws both of them at the same time, he has this awkward decision to make. But on the other side, we saw in his hand he has the Scoop Up Net, so he can lift up that Comfy and go back into Cramorant to finish the turn with an attack.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess as I was starting to mention, and just very touch on it again, both players in theory in a position where they just need to attack 3 times to win. Looks like Pedro may actually be taking the first KO with those 3 attacks. which puts him in a little bit of a good position. Although, as I mentioned, that resource management has been really difficult for him. Because there's a number of switching cards in the discard pile already. We've had to see the Clara go into the lost zone. There's no extra draws from Roxanne to refresh his hand to maybe get a couple of those combo pieces. This Cramorant is going to be going down this turn, but Magnus identifying that he's doesn't want to give Pedro any other opportunities now to further go through his deck. Does target down the Comfey and does announce Subspace well to bring him down to also 2 attacks remaining to take the game.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. You would think against a single price deck you only need 3 more knockouts, and it doesn't really matter which knockouts. But even in the order of taking knockouts against this deck, increasing your odds by limiting the options that Pedro has. Yes, he still has his Cramorant, but that is only dealing 110 damage and not really threatening a knockout on the Palkia. Whereas if you take out the Cramorant, Flower Select gives you access to more cards from your deck. So Pedro is limited in his options this turn. I think his hand didn't look too promising either, so you might just have to announce an attack and deal 110 damage. With the 30 from before, we're looking at 140 damage, so 140 left. Not enough for another Cramorant, not enough for another Sableye, but sooner or later we will see that Radiant Charizard hitting the field. Initially taking 5 energies, 1 fire and 4 colorless to attack for 250 damage. However, thanks to its Excited Heart ability, it costs 1 colorless less for each prize card your opponent has taken. Considering Magnus is down to 1 prize card, this energy cost of Combustion Blast is down to 1 single fire energy.
Yeah, Pedro has just continued to draw his cards, and has to not just be immediately losing the game, does have to bench that Drapion V because it has a bit more HP than that little Manaphy there in the active spot. Not in the best of positions right now. Pedro may have another switching out shortly, knowing right now that Magnus is still locked out of Star Portal. Which is the only option here. Magnus playing and just passing over. So Magnus here playing the level, making sure he knows what his options are. Did get a Sobble from the prizes as well, and just looking like we're just adding up the numbers there. Yeah, looks like that is game 2 taken by Magnus with that choice bout and double to see how this game goes.
Yeah, and considering Pedro lost, he will of course go first in this last match, gives him 1 extra turn, and considering like most of his turns or most of his actions are going through abilities early on through that Flower Select, he can take maximum advantage of the first turn. We see a Fog Crystal to start off, going through the deck. You can also see that like Pedro's like going through his deck once or twice, making sure, but actually considering there's not that much time left and there's a lone Sobble, if Magnus wouldn't have any tools in his hand, however, I see an Irida there, I see Capacious Bucket, so definitely options to get more Pokemon out. But Pedro doesn't know that, and considering the time is getting low, he's like, I'll make sure to play to the maximum speed there, attaching Fire Energy to be able to retreat, and using the first Flower Select of the game.
Yeah, it would have been really interesting if Pedro wanted to consider the Donk, maybe. Because one of the few decks in the format which going second has the opportunity to deal 110 damage relatively easy with the Cramorant. But of course, you're having to play it safe. This is day 2 after all. These are the top players making all the important decisions to make sure that they don't necessarily throw a game away unnecessarily. But we do see just a passover after the 1 flower selecting the Echoing Horn going into the Lost Zone to start the count there for Pedro. But Magnus opens immediately with a Capacious Bucket. Quick Balls one of the water energies away very quickly, gets another Pokemon out, has the Radiant Greninja. Maybe not playing the Irida yet, giving himself the chance to maybe draw into a few good cards. So maybe he can draw into the Battle VIP pass, maybe from a concealed cards. Saves him having to use the Irida for Battle VIP pass at that point. So just a few different options. There's the concealed cards. Draws 2.
I like the dynamic of game 3, where like in the first 2 games, players took the time to make sure they have everything right, but then in game 3, when time is low, you see how the speed picks up. You see how the interactions are so much faster, you see the thinking process is faster, all the decisions, all the cards being picked out of the deck is so much faster. There's the Irida with the Battle VIP Pass, a great combination to have, getting you access to 2 more Pokemon as well. Sometimes you see players not shuffling the deck after 1 deck search. That's typically because they will go back into that deck, so they save that 1 shuffle. And we see Battle VIP Pass getting 2 Palkias out, so the board for Magnus is pretty set up. 2 Sobbles, 2 Palkia Vs, and the Radiant Greninja.
Yeah, it's a great. This is sort of a fantastic board that Magnus would have wanted in that game one, which he unfortunately wasn't able to get out. Yeah, as you mentioned, the pace of play from Magnus there just picked up a little bit. As long as it's a consistent pace of play, you know, generally that's the main thing to consider when playing Pokemon. You can't keep rushing through your own play and then sort of causing issues from both sides. You know, you don't want to make mistakes after all, and at the same time you want to keep that consistent flow of play so that you're not playing too slowly as well. But it's something that from experience you're able to do so in a good manner and in the right sort of way.
And of course you need to make sure that both players are aware of all the actions. Sometimes with how fast they are playing and how the sequence is going, you might like miss a step in your deck search. You might forget to shuffle because you go back into your deck, but then you don't. And like making sure that all that works out. Communication with your opponent is important, but at this level between Pedro and Magnus, they're pretty well aware of what the opponent is trying to achieve, and every single step of their journey to that path is quite clear to both players. So we see the first flower select, and we see a quick ball in hand. I think as of 3 cross switchers, but yeah, he realizes that the Charizard won't get him anywhere this early in the game, so he's discarding that, having access to that fire energy and the Charizard through Clara maybe later on in the game. If of course Magnus is able to draw some prize and reduce the attack cost of that Radiant Charizard.
Yeah, definitely, and I think already getting that 4 in the lost zone onto his second turn very easily, nothing too much to worry about here. Activates that Cramorant attack yet again, and it's just a simple way of potentially just retreating or finding a way to switching out of that Comfey into his Cramorant and just taking an early prize, starting the prize race here and just applying a little pressure to Magnus. Means potentially he may only have one Sobble going into his next turn. So there's the attached retreat with the Psychic Energy. The Cramorant comes to the active spot and it's just going to spit innocently for 110 damage shortly. Just confirming that the 4, and there we go. There's the KO on the Sobble.
Yeah, having 2 Sobbles in play, of course, allows you to evolve the other one, keeping that in play. And we also see that there's no path to the peak yet, so you can take maximum advantage of that concealed cards ability of the Radiant Greninja, drawing more cards. And you once again see there are more cards, like I think 2 or 3 water energies in discard pile now. He's drawing more from the deck, so he's able to, thanks to no path to the peak, also use Palkia VStar's ability. Manaphy, of course, is already active for Pedro, so preventing that Shuriken attack from the Radiant Greninja. But yeah, a lot of actions to be played there. We see the Drizzle evolve.
Yeah, so we just saw that last quick ball action from Pedro. Again, making sure he has that Manaphy down as soon as possible. He didn't want to see both his Comfey and his Sableye go down into his discard pile just from that Moonlight Shuriken.
That was a quite interesting interaction. Like, I think one path for Magnus here is bossing up the Manaphy and then maybe starting the Water Shuriken attack or the Shuriken attack from Radiant Greninja afterwards. But Pedro is like, well, yes, you may knock out my Manaphy, but here, let me show that I have a Clara and I will pick it up back and then go back into that action.
So yeah, there's a star portal happening straight now. But Magnus still has to go through the motion. Pedro may say that, yes, I have the Clara in hand, it's coming back. But Magnus still has to go through the motion. Maybe Pedro's put in an awkward spot. Maybe he can't Clara that turn to be able to continue through his actions of applying pressure himself. But does take the knockout there with Subspace Swell on the Manaphy. Pedro again, not immediately using Clara, of course, looking through his options, getting as much information as possible from the flower selecting first. Lost zones, an escape rope, card to his hand. Which is just it looks like it was a scoop up net. So giving himself a lot of utility. Both players, after the time was just announced, has agreed that this game's not going to end. A little fist bump there. And yeah, game 3 doesn't finish. So both players, 1 game apiece. And we get a tie.